realize, understand and empathize. We could learn to fill the world with love.
Hello, Humanists Australia. We are live today on a beautiful weather. I'm in Melbourne. Now, before we begin, I want to get straight into the intro because we have Andrew Copson with us today, who is a large influence on the humanist movement around the world. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today on the land of the Burrung and the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. I hope I've said that correctly. I don't know about that, but I'll try my best to get better. I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I promise to listen deeply to your voices with an open heart and to stand up for justice, treaty, and truth. Today, we celebrate the 5th birthday of Humanist Australia. Additionally, we have a special guest who helped launch Humanist Australia all that time ago, Andrew Copson, who is the CEO of Humanists UK and has plenty of influence on humanism in the modern age. We also have Marianne Cosgrove, who is the CEO of Humanists Australia, and Leslie Allen, one of our directors, and a leader of two of our Humanist Australia communities, the Ex-Religious Support Network and Philosophy Matters. Additionally, today is Human Rights Day, as many humanists celebrate today as a meaningful date for the historical achievement of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Drafted by the United Nations Committee, chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt, it was accepted by the General Assembly as Resolution 217 during its third session on the 10th of December, 1948. Now, Andrew, it's so great to have you back, and thank you for joining us. But before I bombard you with a whole bunch of questions, I want to take it over to Marianne so she can catch you up with all the great achievements that Humanists Australia has been able to achieve. So, Marianne, effectively, just take it away. What's been some great things that have happened in the last 5 years since we've seen Andrew?
All right. So Andrew helped launch us at our, we called it the Launchapalooza back in December 2020. He was one of the speakers that we had on a full weekend of presentations and discussions. So spent about the 9 months prior to that launch setting up all of the infrastructure that we needed to get started. So that was one of the big achievements, the early achievements, especially getting registered charity status. That's really helped us since then. We started out with 5 programs under our first CEO, Heidi Nicol. And those programs were campaigns, ceremonies, communities, communication, and chaplaincy. We've since broadened those a bit. We extended our communication to be engagement. So our engagement program is now our biggest program, and it's about reaching out to people, sending out information to people, but also providing opportunities like this where we can have meaningful conversations with each other as humanists through a variety of different media, live streams, and also Zoom presentations and other avenues. But I think probably our biggest achievement in these 5 years has been to build a culture where any Australian humanist can join national or a community, and they can work on things that are fulfilling and meaningful for them, in line with our mission, vision, and values. And I think it's that volunteering culture that has really encouraged people like Jason and Les to come on board and work with the organisation in areas that they are passionate about.
Now, before I take that too far away, Les, I think your mic might be catching up on your breathing there. Are you able to just wiggle that around a bit and move it down if you can? Les? Hello?
I can
Les,
hear
can
you.
you hear me?
Oh, how's that sounding?
Yeah,
Yeah. I think it's just catching your breath there a little bit. Yeah, that sounds much better. Thanks for that. Andrew,
Right.
take it away. What has been happening in your last 5 years as well? And also, I really want to take it back to contrast of how your first 5 years were when you first took the CEO. And I think you were one of the youngest, I think, if not
That's
mistaken.
True. That's true. The youngest, 28. I was a long time ago.
Jeez. Okay. Yes. So if you can take it back, tell us what your first 5 years were, and also what you were doing in the last 5 years as well. What's been your big movements?
Well, I think it's wonderful what Humanists Australia has achieved in the last 5 years. It's so wonderful hearing what Marianne said, and really going about it in exactly the right way with the same mission, with the right mission and vision, and really realising it is fantastic. And the last 5 years, as you say, in the UK has been a bit different because, of course, Humanist UK is very well established, 130 years old next year, and so different in some respects, but in some respects there are some points of connection. I mean, I think every humanist organization in the world actually is looking at doing the sort of thing that Marianne was just talking about, which is putting more time into building community and human connection. And I think, of course, there's something that is inherent in humanist organizations about that. Of course, we're interested in that. If I think back to the history of Humanist UK, in the 1890s, it was very much about the people who, by the standards of their time, were quite eccentric, in their beliefs. Being not Christian and having very progressive beliefs, banding together and connecting initially in sort of almost like congregations, but certainly locally, and in not just to fortify each other by knowing each other, but also to look outwards and address the issues of the world as well. So that's something we've also been developing in Humanist UK in the last few years, putting more time and effort and resources into developing local communities and also communities of interest, which it sounds like you do as well. So in some respects, there's a lot of similarity in the last 5 years. And I also think that maybe that there, here, and also in humanist groups around the world has a common cause of being a post-pandemic feature as well. I think a lot of people felt the very great urgency of connection and human connection, having been told not to go near anyone for a couple of years. And so that's certainly something that we've been doing here as well. The other thing that's happened in the UK, of course, in the last 5 years is that there's been quite a radical change of government. When I became chief executive at Humanist UK, as you say, at the very young age, it was a long time ago. It was 2009. I took up the job on the 1st of January 2010. And there we were just in the last days, literally the last weeks, really, of the Labour government of before, which, of course, did a huge number of things which were very agreeable to humanist priorities. Passed the Human Rights Act. Still don't have one in Australia, hopefully you will. Passed the Human Rights Act, passed the Equality Act, did so much, limited admissions on religious schools, public schools. And then we had 14 years, which was the majority of my time as chief executive, of conservative or conservative coalition government, which on the whole was very bad for humanist priorities in policy terms. And now we've got a new government again that is generally better. No government's perfect and they all let you down in the end, but it's better for humanist priorities. And so a lot of work has been going on there as well. We've got our assisted dying bill, which of course you may, where we're catching up with Australia, parts of Australia. We've got a lot of reform of the education curriculum, which should lead to the inclusion of humanism, we're almost certain. We've got a marriage law reform programme coming from the government, which should change the position of our humanist celebrants. So the last 5 years haven't been so busy on the policy side, but the last year certainly has. And that's all accelerated for us now.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm curious about, because it's sort of like a bit of a trend that, or not so much a trend, but I'm seeing discussions happen where Marianne's really trying to gravitate all these different people together and build a real culture of getting out there and doing it. And I must say, Marianne, you do a fantastic job of bringing people together. Did you experience any sort of like resistance in sort of like in terms of getting groups working together, or did you have sort of like a disparity of groups throughout UK at the time, which you were sort of like trying to round up and be like, come along for the ride, effectively? Or
it's all such a long time ago. I wouldn't want to unearth past controversies.
Yeah.
When I became chief, when I took on the job in 2010, I mean, it's fair to say that there had been a certain way of doing things for many years that was unchallenged, especially in the local group area. So one of the first things I did, yes, exactly, is try and bring everyone into a sort of alignment. How well that worked, I don't know, but it was definitely about having a common message, bringing people together more. I do think that one of the things about groups of free-thinking people, which of course humanist groups are, is that sometimes it can be it can sometimes be a challenge to get everyone walking in the same direction at the same speed to the same target. And that's why I think it's so important that Humanist Australia spent so much time thinking about these things very deeply and carefully, so that when you did set marching off, you were all, in alignment. Or I'm sure I'm making that sound easier than it was, but roughly in alignment. But healthy disagreement is a good thing in every movement and organisation. But I think it was a struggle. I mean, I think in the end, what helped us sort of reorganise humanism in the UK was the fact that we enjoyed a lot of growth between 2010 and now. I mean, we had something like 5,000-6,000 members and supporters, and now we've got 150,000, and that's a considerable growth. Our ceremonies grew and grew and grew. More and more people heard about us. We really seized the opportunity of social media that was possible then in a way that I think it is still now possible to seize that. But at the time, if you seized it ahead of the curve, it transformed you. And we had this thing called the Atheist Bus campaign, which was something that just went completely viral. Spiked our membership, spiked our media mentions. It was one of those occasions when you couldn't keep up with the phone calls. When people used to make phone calls back in the old days. And so there were just things like that where we took advantage of the opportunities and created some opportunities too. And I think that success galvanized people as well, because success, as well as having vision and purpose, obviously success is a great inducement to get on board. And I think that that was also the case, because although Humanist UK had sort of three peak points, which was like the 1890s, the 1960s, and today, really, which always keeps me awake at night, because I think, well, the only way from a peak is obviously back down. But hopefully it won't be for some time. So there was some rebuilding work to do. I think this is a natural cycle of organisations, and it's just good that in the first 5 years you're obviously on the up as you are.
Yeah.
Though I dream of having 5,000 members, that would be fantastic.
Your dreams will come true. I can see it.
Liz has actually been quite a humanist in Australia for quite some time, so he's sort of seen a lot of ebbs and flows coming and going, haven't you, Liz? Is Liz picking me up, or?
Certainly have. I did want to ask Andrew. Andrew, you mentioned. I noticed my sound is out of sync with the video and maybe out of sync with everyone else. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, that's all right. Ask your question away, Liz.
If I can ask. Right. Andrew, you mentioned that campaign where you couldn't keep up with phone calls. And can you say a little bit more about that campaign that you said brought in a lot of members?
Oh, sure. I mean, it was a long time ago now, and it was very specific to the times I think that we were living in. But in the late noughties, late 2000s, some Christian groups paid for some bus adverts in London that said basically, "You're going to burn in hell." And there was a comedian. No one noticed it because it was London, so everyone was keeping their heads down. It was raining, and they didn't look at the bus adverts anyway. But a young comedian and writer called Ariane Shireen wrote a sort of almost joke blog in The Guardian, which at the time was, of course, online phenomenon in its comment section. There was, millions of readers, and said, we should have an atheist version that says there's probably no God, so stop worrying and enjoy life. And started a crowdfunder, she asked us to then start a crowdfunder, and we did. And the target was something like £5,000, and then we ended up, I think, raising in the end like £190,000.
Wow.
And so it was this national phenomenon, which is quite interesting actually, because people have even written academic textbooks about it. People can still send us academic textbooks and monographs that have been written about the late social media effect of fund. It's an incredible phenomenon. I don't know, maybe you even had it in Australia, actually, but countries all over the world, I think there was 37 countries took it up, and it just made headlines. I mean, looking back on it sort of in historical terms, it was just at the end of the new atheist peak, in the sort of the end of the 2000s, and it was capitalizing on all that, interest that had gone before. There was a very specific moment then, I think, in the UK anyway, when people hadn't, they were still annoyed with religious groups and they liked to see those sorts of messages. Now people's attention has shifted elsewhere, at least in the UK. It doesn't have such high salience as it did at the time. That sort of new atheist wave as well. But
New Age atheist,
it was
wasn't it?
incredibly successful at the time.
Yeah, New Age atheism was the like your Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and stuff like that.
Yeah, and Richard got involved in the bus campaign as well, as a sort of front person for it. So that's the other thing, of course, is that, I mean, what Humanist UK was able to do at the turn of the century was actually capitalise on a lot of that, that work that other people were doing. And when people were interested, there's a lot of public interest suddenly in not being religious. We were there to go, aha, and have you heard about the alternative? And so that was quite helpful at the time. You've got to be attuned to those moments. I mean, I'm sure those national moments come in Australia or at state level media, whatever, when, just something happens. And if you're attentive to it, you can just take advantage of that.
Yeah, you've got to be on the ball and ready to go at a moment's notice to be able to do that. And that's quite difficult with a limited pool of volunteers that we have. Although I think we're beginning to come to a position where we've got enough people in the engagement space to be able to take off. Just getting to that stage.
Yeah. We also, I think, import a lot of our culture to some degree over here in Australia, in the sense of like, a lot of our kids are starting to have American accents from the amount of YouTube that they watch. And, we see sort of like the trends flow on from the UK and from America and come over here. They don't sort of hit as hard or as extreme, I would say, but they definitely have that sort of flow on effect. And you can see some of the people, make similar sort of arguments or engagements. And you will even see some people think that the laws that apply in America apply over here to some degree.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful where you're getting your information. I think even, there's a lot of culture that flows on here, so it's a little bit difficult to sort of see what's going on there.
Yeah, I wouldn't want you to think that was only in Australia, because I mean, even there was a situation here where I think this must be an online phenomenon, where some young people here were talking about the First Amendment as if it was like a free speech protection that applied somehow in the UK, but it was all coming from. That's interesting, isn't it? The sort of erosion of boundaries. I mean, that's an opportunity for humanists as well, of course, because it means that we can be more transnational in the content that we produce and the connections that we make. And after all, humanism is a genuinely universal and global worldview. There are, both thousands of years ago, there were humanists everywhere, and now there are today in every country. And so it is an opportunity as well, that sort of erosion of those boundaries. Although it's also a threat. Yeah, it's a threat too. It's a threat. It's a challenge as well. Yeah.
In particular, the racism is coming across. Racism, anti-immigration, anti-trans, all of that's being imported here. It's not as extreme yet, and I hope it doesn't go that way, but that's something we need to be battling.
And it goes the other way. I mean, we've been importing bad things from Australia. I think that one of the things that
they used to export them.
Yeah, you can Christian chaplains in schools. That's one thing that I think started in Australia and has now been Christian groups elsewhere trying to use that in other countries, especially in the West, to say, well, look, it's worked really well in Australia, having lots of Christian chaplains in schools. Let's have them here. And we're going, well, no.
Yeah, so we've got a program for accrediting humanist chaplains now, and humanist pastoral carers, and working towards humanist community companions who are providing peer-based support. In fact, Jason's done a program on community companioning through Humanists Victoria.
Yes, I have, and it's been quite the. It's been really good because I've been able to. And like, just to give you a bit of an update, Andrew, as well, I've only just become a humanist probably like July this year. So very, very new, in the sense of like actually defining what, my foundation of life is. So very much, humanistic morals before that. But then, I've got a bit of extra, like, free time outside of my work life. And therefore I was like, I want to volunteer back. And I also want to discover sort of like the, my underlying values, which then brought me to Humanists Victoria. and I've been able to do a lot of volunteer work, which I think there is now sort of like a case for people sort of in my age, that sort of millennial sort of character, to sort of look for that volunteering sort of service with. But, a lot of people in Australia aren't religious enough to actually go down to the church. And I think that, humanism has a real potential right now to sort of give or assist with those opportunities, I think. So that may be, as you were saying earlier, one of those points of capitalization.
Yeah. Well, when you get those opportunities in a society, it's time to definitely capitalize them.
One of the reasons we started Humanists Australia 5 years ago was because we were worried about how when people move away from religions, they lose that sense of community and the sense of meaning and fulfillment in their lives, and they need to find it somewhere else. And, Les has been working with people through his ex-religious support network to help them come to terms with that loss. Les, do you want to talk about that? Looks like Les is still lagging a bit.
I think he will for the
I can.
time.
I notice I've got about a 4-second lag on my audio, a really long lag. And then I hear myself back 4 seconds later. So yes, I started up the ex-religious support network here in Australia in 2018 because there was a real need for it, because people were escaping from high control religions and going through quite a number of psychological travails like they do all around the world, having to re-establish their identity, their worldview, their ethics. It's a real discombobulating experience for many, many people. And I was always interested in the intellectual aspects of religion, but I saw, talking to people, this deep psychological impact it was having on people who were embroiled in a religion that was no longer suiting them or actually doing them psychological damage. So the group's been growing quite steadily for quite a while now, which I'm very pleased with. And we meet regularly face-to-face and on Zoom as well.
I think that's really important work. We have a program now in the UK called Faith to Faithless, which is the name it came with. It's not the name that we gave it. It was a program that started outside of Humanists UK and then grew beyond its ability to sustain itself, so it became part of us, which I expect Les has probably maybe corresponded with them. I hope he has anyway, because I'm sure that they'd like to support efforts there too, and probably they've got something to learn from you. But one of the things that this work has done for us is it's enormously diversified the population of humanists, as it were, within the formal organization as well, because whereas 100 years ago, and even when I was chief executive, started to be chief executive to some extent, most members of Humanists UK were either raised non-religious like I was, or they were ex-Christians with a few ex-Jews. And now, UK society, especially in the urban centres of the UK, is so much more diverse that now we've got ex-Hindus, ex-Sikhs, ex-Muslims, ex-Orthodox Jews, ex-members of all these sort of charismatic churches and so on. And more than Humanists UK members did 20 or 30 years ago, those people do need a different type of support. That they are often giving up, family, sometimes community, sometimes jobs. The great extreme, there can be, a catastrophic loss of connection and purpose. And so that is, I think, increasingly important work everywhere. And I know that in countries where humanist groups are just getting started or are, as it were, vulnerable because maybe they're not legally recognized or whatever, like Malaysia or like Indonesia, they have those problems too, because the social sanctions of leaving a religion, as well as the existential consequences, the social sanctions of leaving a religion are enormous. And in some of those countries, the legal sanctions of leaving a religion are quite significant as well. So I think it's definitely a growing trend for humanist organizations to focus on this. I don't think it's not completely new. I mean, in the mid-20th century, especially, lots of humanist organizations pioneered non-directive counseling in the 30s, 40s, and into the 50s. And then largely when those things became a wider secular endeavor, humanist counseling agencies tended to shut up shop. And it's only in the last 20 years in most countries where humanist pastoral care, existential care, chaplaincy has re-established itself. Well, apart from in some places like Belgium and the Netherlands, where it never stopped. But in lots of countries, it's only now re-establishing itself. And I think it's re-establishing itself with that fresh dynamic of caring for those who particularly are at a transition point in their lives between religious and non-religious beliefs, as well as in settings like prisons and hospitals where people are experiencing loss or have difficulties and need pastoral existential support there. I think this is a really good function for humanist groups. I don't know what it's like in Australia, but even 10 years ago here, there were people who've used our services to support people who leave high control religions, who were trying to find professional support to help them from the psychiatry or the counselling world. And they would look at people who specialize, practitioners who specialized in loss of faith or in change of religion. And they would find 9 times out of 10 that this person was someone who would be able to counsel you to retain your faith. And this was the service that they were advertising. And so that assumption, even within the caring professions and the therapeutic professions, was so significant that I think it's sometimes only the humanist care people who actually say, "Oh yeah, we might be onto a good thing here. Maybe you do need to change. Welcome. Let's support you where you are now. If those things no longer suit you." So I think that's a really good role for humanist groups. I don't know enough about the religious demographics of Australia to know what sort of what sort of challenges you might be facing there, but in the UK, it's increasingly diverse.
That sort of leads into an interesting question, actually, as naturally we've got our census coming up next August or so in 2026. And I know you've done a lot of work around this sort of stuff and to some degrees of success, and unfortunately not as successful as we wanted it to be in the more recent one, but next time, and it's a distance away. What have you found, I guess, how important is it that Humanists UK census, for instance, campaign, and why? Or why is it important that the UK Humanists campaign for this, and why?
Well, it's incredibly important. And at the beginning, so our religion question in the UK, in the England and Wales census, I should say, although I'll talk about the England and Wales census, but it's roughly the same in other places too, or they're slightly different. In the England and Wales census, that we only had a religion question for the first time in 2001. So we've only had it 3 times. Now, the reason the government had it is that they wanted to be able to distinguish between the Asian population of England and Wales. Bluntly, they wanted to know whether they were Sikh, Hindu, or Muslim. And so the Office for National Statistics, which is our central data service, had an idea at the beginning that they might just ask the question, "Are you any of these, Sikh, Muslim, or Hindu?" And then you might tick it. But that was not going to fly. And so they did a lot of work on what question they should ask. Now, we favoured at that point a 2-part question. Do you have do you belong to any particular religion? Yes, no. And if so, which? Because we know that the form of the question, especially in religious matters, has an enormous effect on the data. And we thought that that the ONS wanted to ask about religion, they should use that question. And the ONS said, that the National Statistics said, we don't really want to know people's religion. We want to know people's sort of vague cultural religious affiliation. So actually, because they wanted to know who is Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh, and they wanted to know at that level. They didn't really want to know who was religious and who wasn't. So they said, we don't want that. We're going to ask just one question: what is your religion? And we said, but that begs the question. And they said, yes, but we don't care. I believe the Australian question is the same. What's the person's religion? You've got the same closed question. But we
tried to have that changed for the 2026 census. We campaigned pretty strongly on changing it to, do you have a religion? If so, what it is.
Exactly. And that's what we've all tried to do around the world, because it is the better question. And there is a 2-part question in Scotland, which gives more accurate data. But on the other hand, having started with that question in 2001, and I think in Australia, at least, like in England and Wales, you have at least got no religion at the top. So it is clear that would be there is some inducement to tick that box at the top. We had it at the bottom in 2001, so it was even worse, because you had a whole list of religions that you could pick. So anyway, in 2001, when they used this question, it was a big blow for us, because over 70% of people ticked Christian. And everyone was like, what? I mean, even in 2001, this country was a country where people hadn't been going to church. You know, the first church census in England was in 1840 something, and it showed that most people didn't go to church. So, I mean, it's been that way in this country for a very, very long time. And so the idea that 72% of people were Christian was actually suddenly a massive boost to religious lobbyists. But the value of then having that question over time, of course, especially through the campaigning that we did, especially the social media campaigning, but we also did traditional media campaigning as well in 2011, 2010 and 2020 for those censuses. And our line was, if you're not religious, say so. That's what we basically said. And then we gave some public examples of public policies that have been shaped by the 72% Christian fact, you know, because once that data was out there, churches were using it to lobby for extra religion in schools. They were using it to lobby for extra money for religious, keeping the state church, everything. So we pointed these things out. And then, of course, there was a massive decline in Christian ticking in 2011. And another massive decline in 2021. So, in fact, keeping the same question suited us in the end, because it suddenly made very vivid and demonstrated a really dramatic decline in Christianity in particular, which is now under 50%. So, from 72% to under 50% in 23 years, whatever it is quite good. So, I don't think we would carry on campaigning to change the question these days, because the long-term data series is now just too valuable, like the consistency of the data over time. And also we've got other sources of data. So there's something called the British Social Attitude Survey that does ask the two-part question, and is a sort of very international gold standard social research survey that's been run for almost 50 years now. So we've got that data as well, which is quite good. I don't know whether there's an equivalent in Australia, but that data with the two-part question has, of course, shown for many years now that there's a majority of non-religious people in Britain, actually, not just in England.
How much discrepancy are you seeing between the two-part question and the one-part question from the social survey versus
a huge number? It's a 20-point difference. 20
points. Wow.
Oh God, it's absolutely huge. It's absolutely huge because, and this is true of all surveys. You know, if you ask, it's like, isn't it, saying, you know, what's your favorite color? Someone ticks a color box, and then or asking someone, do you have a favorite color or do you not have a favorite color? Well, if you ask it like that, a lot of people can say, no, I don't really, no. So, but if you force someone to choose an option, and by the way, they're not like us, they haven't really thought about it. It's a very low salience to them. So there was some academic research that was done, because obviously everyone was fascinated by this 72% Christian result in 2001, because everyone knew it couldn't be right. I mean, it's just obviously not the case that 72% of people believed in God and Jesus and were practicing Christians. So there was a lot of academic research done on why people ticked the Christian box. And I think this is useful too, because if you're going to be campaigning for people to get non-religious people to tick no religion, then it's useful to think about why they tick religious boxes. Why do non-religious people tick religious boxes in censuses? And the answers were very diverse. I mean, there was like, oh, well, I was christened, so I suppose if I'm anything, I'm this. That was obviously a response that was heavily conditioned by the lack of a two-part question. There was evidence that white working class people in particular, who lived in areas where there was high level of migration, were ticking boxes because they wanted to say they were not Muslim. So they were ticking Christian because they wanted to be not Muslim. And I fear we might see more of that in our 2031 census, actually, because there's been that sort of negative integration that's happened as a result. Or, you know, in 2001 especially, there was an ethnic element to it as well, of course. Lots of older people just thought, oh, well, you know, it's Church of England.
I think when the last census came out, I'm pretty sure I called up my mum and asked her what religion.
Right. And you would not be that, you know, you probably think that's a bit silly now, but that was not silly. Like, that is what a lot of people do. Some people go like, oh, I don't know, what am I? You know, because they don't care about it really.
Yeah, it was quite some time ago for myself. So, and I was in my mid-20s odd. So I was just like, yeah, I'm not really sure. I'll call my mum. She'll know. She knows my blood type, you know, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and that's the low salience that religious identity really has for most people as well. You know, I mean, it's I think that one thing that we mustn't do, and I don't know if it is in Australia, is that every time a census comes up in the UK, there's some people who go, oh, we must positively campaign for people to write in humanist or to write in atheist or whatever. And I always think that's really silly, because we could never possibly reach through our campaigning all the people who would identify as humanists, never mind all the people who have a humanist worldview. And so I think to encourage the small number of people that we would be able to reach with that message to do that one thing just makes it look like there's a really small number of humanists. So, a few thousand people in England wrote in humanist. And after the census, I was asked on some media, only a few thousand people wrote humanist. What does that tell you? And I said, well, I'm literally the chief executive of Humanist UK, and I didn't write humanist in. So I think what that tells me is that there's millions of humanists who didn't do that, because that's not, what the question was. So I do think we need to avoid doing that, and just get them to take no religion. And then there are other social policy instruments, that social research instruments that can be used to, detect other things.
Yeah, I think, Mary, you'd probably know better than I do, because you've been in the game for a bit longer. But in Australia, if you write humanist, I think it converts to atheist. Is that right?
I don't think so. I think you can have a separate category, but in our Census 26 campaign, we're encouraging people to just say not religious.
Excellent.
Is it online?
I guess. No, I don't know.
Sorry, what was the question?
Is it online, the census, or is it paper-based?
The last one was paper-based. I'm not sure about this one.
Yeah, not heard. Les, do you know? Give him a moment to catch up.
I have a vague recollection that last time it was online.
Maybe I'm thinking of the one before. Answer, we don't know. I'm sure Michael Dove would know. He's he's the person who's heading up the Census 26 campaign. He's the leader of the Secularism Australia Forum, which is a group of organisations, secularist organisations who collaborate on a variety of things.
Then one of the things I'm noticing, Andrew, as well, and I'm sure you probably noticed it, or maybe not. I don't know. You just got out of being the president of Humanists International, so
just got out.
Just got out. Just dropped out. But we're starting to see like much more of a rise of and I've sort of seen it as I've been diving into the humanist information pretty heavy in the last couple of months. But there's more and more, I feel, humanists like sort of being proud. It feels like almost like, saying that they need to promote humanism in a way. And there seems to be more of a collective sort of wanting of getting that sort of brand of sorts out there and saying, yes, we need to encourage the YouTubers. We need to encourage people to actually make that claim. Is that the same sort of trend that you're feeling around the world, or is that just something that I've sort of like?
That is absolutely a global trend, and I think it has many different causes. I mean, obviously, humanist organisations have always wanted to raise understanding of humanism, but I think we've definitely become everywhere more sort of feel that's maybe more urgent. We've both become more empowered to do it and have the means of it at our disposal with new media and everything else. But I think also people feel it's more urgent. And the second reason, and I guess there's one of the reasons why people feel it's urgent, is just there is clearly an enormous push across all media and of course everywhere in the opposite direction. Yeah. And I think that, everyone feels the need to respond to that sort of phenomenon. I mean, especially in the UK on the social media spaces, especially, we're now facing such an incredible onslaught of, nationalistic, Christian nationalistic, religious of various kinds, whether it's Muslim or Christian or whatever else. You've targeted at very specific audiences as well, of course, which is possible. Media that is targeted as there you go. There's the answer about the census. Radicalizing people and anti-human rights movements and everything else. That I think that we've probably been a bit slow as organisations to catch up with that. I mean, I mentioned the use of social media by Humanists UK in the 2000s, and that was very, we were well ahead of the curve there. There was a wonderful moment when the Church of England had the same number of followers on Twitter as Humanists UK, and I thought this is incredibly. I mean, that's not the, as they say, that's not the performance indicator that mattered the most, of course, to them. But it meant something. It said something about how at that point we were capitalising on those new trends, and they weren't. Now I think that has to some extent gone into reverse. I mean, especially now that there are people with very strong axes to grind who are pouring money into what you might call various anti-humanist positions. There obviously is an urgent need, and I think humanist organisations are reflecting that. In Humanists UK, certainly we've started to think more, especially about younger people. Younger people are becoming much more fragmented. They're in much more not completely impermeable, but at least to some extent separate bubbles, with which is very dangerous for the wider information ecosystem. It's not just dangerous for for humanism, it's dangerous for democracy, really, and for everything else that we hold dear in our societies. So we've been looking at TikTok. The Belgian humanists have just employed a TikToker, full-time TikToker. Yeah. You were saying just before we came online, Jason, and I think like you, I've been struck by this. The American Humanist Association have been putting some investment into, I think, also TikTokers, but young YouTubers and others. I think that's really good way to go. I think that we need to humanist organizations, like a lot of organizations, are quite traditionally structured. Boards and volunteers do all these things in relatively traditional ways. And one of the things I think that we need to be able to do more is something that the American Humanist Association has done, which is have the courage actually to say, hey, out there, who is there? Are you interested in, we'll just throw you a check, as they do at the AHA, to help you make some content because you've shown us that you can, and you just go out there and do it, and tell us what you've done, and foster that sort of dynamic.
I'd love to speak with Fish Stark from AHA about that program, because I don't know whether they're restricting that to content creators in the US, but definitely it'd be great if we could have some of that support here.
Well, you must come to the Humanist Congress in Ottawa next year, and Fish will be there, I'm sure.
I'd love to, but travel has really been taking a toll on my health lately.
I'm sorry to hear that.
The first time we met in person in Copenhagen, I had COVID and I had to stay at the back of the hall with my mask on the whole time.
Oh dear, yes. Well, hopefully there'll be some online options, but also Fish is very friendly. You can just give him a call.
I have emailed him, so we'll see if he gets a chance to respond. I'm really interested in their approach to communities as well. Seeing the anti-humanist movement in the US, they feel like the way to build humanism is to help build communities where people can see humanists at work doing good things within the community, like supporting people who've lost their food stamps, for example, and begin to understand humanists as not being those horrible atheist people who are going to burn in hell forever and who we want to have nothing to do with, but people who are genuinely good people who want to help.
And this is a US problem, of course, in many ways. Yes. But I do think you're right. I think they've got a long journey ahead of them there. But I think that it's an interesting strategy, this local community one that they've got. I hope that they can make that work.
Yeah. Okay, Mary.
I was just going to say, we're trying to build our community presence as well. We've got communities now in Brisbane, Canberra, Sydney, and Melbourne, as well as the online special interest communities that Les runs, the Ex-Religious Support Network and Philosophy Matters. We've got Rainbow Humanists as well for the LGBTIQA plus community. And of course, we run our national events as well. So it's kind of a national community.
It's kind of been one of those situations where I feel like and like this is just new eyes coming into humanism, but it feels like a lot of humanists, they're incredibly smart people, like to say the least. Like the general humanist is like, a philosopher of some sort, or a doctor, or some learned person. And it's almost like that, well, we've got the best argument. Why aren't people listening to it? And it's not necessarily having the best argument or having the best ideas. It's about hitting that emotional level, which I sometimes feel gets a little missed. Even though we talk about it so much as humanists, I feel like it can be overlooked sometimes. And it's like, well, we want to do this big like activism thing, but we're forgetting about the actual connection with the average day human,
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
but that's just my take.
I mean, I think you're right about that, and I think it's also, I think you're trying to address it there in the right way. Is that there's two responses to that. One is content, and one is community. Get the engaging content that will demonstrate the warm and empathetic side, and connect with people emotionally as well as intellectually, and then also community where literal connections can happen. I think that's exactly right. I mean, we also need to understand that people want different things out of humanist organisation. Some people don't want. Some people are allergic to the very idea of community. I think quite a few, and and others just it's all they want, and they embrace it, and they want to be there, and they want to be doing the stuff and meet the people, and they like intergenerational community, and it's just the thing that they want. Some people want to be celebrants. Some people want to have a ceremony. Some people want to be pastoral carers. Some people in prisons, hospitals, different places. And I think that it's really important as well that we offer just so many opportunities so many inroads to humanist organisations as possible.
Yeah, so we've got the ceremonies stream, and we've got the well-being stream, as well as our communities. That idea that a lot of humanists are intellectual people, that's kind of true, I guess, of the founders of the organisations and communities that we have. But it's also something that the person in the street can readily embrace, and that sort of difference between people who are intellectual and want to talk about the philosophy and people who are there for connection. We've got two streams of events. We've actually got more than two streams, but two of our streams of events in the Canberra community exemplify that. We have the discussion group, which is pretty intellectual discussion group talking about policy or current affairs or current issues, whatever it might be. And we've also got the human-hearted living, which is about living life according to humanist values and providing support and connection with each other to form a supportive, inclusive community for each other, which is a lot more. It's something anyone can get on board, whether they've got that intellectual bent or not.
That's it, isn't it? And I think, and the culture you're building, Mary, is gravitating towards, building up that support network, the ability for people to come in and find, I'd say like a home of a sorts, of like a connection of sorts. Find your people. Like I can certainly say from my experience, like, being such a new member, is coming into see, Les is, I'm big on the intellectual side, I like to think, but I also like that support side as well, and I love seeing that sort of grow, and it's definitely there. It's got the heart, and I believe next year, with everything that you're doing, Andrew, as well, I see it, it's a big year for humanism, I feel.
Let's hope so, yeah.
Getting young people into it. You were young when you got into it. Was there anything particular that got you into it?
I'm still relatively young in UK terms, I'm somewhere in the middle age. Middle age is not old, is it? I think for me it was so very specific. We're all part of demographics, but for me it was very specific. I joined Humanists UK first as a member because of the campaign against the growth of state-funded faith schools. And I started working there because I was interested in the work they were doing on the Equality Act at the time and on education. And that was my way into the staff team of Humanists UK. I came in through the public affairs, research and education angle. So I think that there are challenges growing challenges in attracting young people into membership of any organisation. I don't know about Australia, but membership in general is a concept with declining relevance. And so we've definitely in Humanists UK reduced our emphasis on membership and increased our membership on supporters, email recipients, people who engage with our content and so on and so forth. That's the sort of thing we're more likely now to measure and to drive, targets towards. But of course, it is also important to make sure that our generations are refreshing themselves. I don't detect at the moment that we have any problem there. I mean, the average age of a Humanists UK member sort of stays pretty much where it is, which of course implies that we've got younger people coming in all the time because it doesn't change. And so I've always been relatively comfortable with that. But there's no doubt that there's a sort of looming threat on the horizon there, I think, because especially the young people's information ecosystem, as we should call it, has become so fragmented, in particular to them as individuals, that there is a risk that we won't be heard about, apart from something they learned about in school, maybe on their worldviews curriculum, and that's not the most attractive thing necessarily to be remembered for. So I think there is a problem there. I think it's right to invest in social media as a result. There's so much background noise at the moment now coming from some. I can hear myself. I think it must be coming from Les's.
I'm just going to pop you on mute, Les, and see if that fixes it, okay?
Yeah,
all right.
That has fixed it.
Excellent.
So, yes, what we're saying. So I think with that in particular, I think with choosing where to invest social media in particular, I think I was making those, as it were, sort of funding decisions. I'd definitely be leaning more towards TikTok and YouTube now than I would be towards, Facebook and whatever other options are available. And just because I think there is a risk that humanism does sort of get drowned out by that other more targeted content creation.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting. Oh, sorry, go, Mary.
5 years ago, when we started Humanists Australia, that ageing problem was very apparent in Australian humanist organisations. So we used to have 5 state societies, maybe 6, and the organisers of those societies were ageing, so that the members of some of the state societies, the average age was in the 70s and 80s. They weren't bringing the young people up behind them. And the result of that was that 2 of the organisations, Western Australia and South Australia, they'd already folded by the time we started Humanists Australia. And Humanist Queensland has now folded. Humanist New South Wales is struggling. Humanist Victoria is doing okay, and they've got some new leadership that have come in this year that are a fair bit younger than the previous leadership. But here at Humanists Australia, the volunteering culture is bringing in the young folks.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So we've got Jason's just come on board. We also have our new e-news editor, Steph. She's in her 20s and she's doing a fantastic job with our fortnightly newsletter. Most of the people who are coming on board are significantly younger than me. Not that that's too hard, but it's good to see the younger folks coming up.
Yeah,
I think it's about them opportunities and enabling them.
I think that's a good point, actually. I've noticed that as well. Like some of our local group organisations, when the opportunities are there and they're appealing, then of course you do young people. That's how you came in, Jason, was it? Seizing the opportunity?
No, I think it's here's my perspective on it from an Australian viewpoint, is that I feel like the younger generation is quite political at the moment, and so they get caught up with, like, they want to make a difference and they just assume that the first thing to make a difference is that political side of things. So like we've got the young Libs and the young Labor parties and whatnot. My brother uni student, classic, uni student, very, left-leaning, all that sort of stuff. Really wants to be getting into activism, but he's not even aware, and he's quite a learned fella, but he wasn't aware of humanism. And I think, as we saw just someone say earlier, that they don't want that label. I think it's easier to put yourself on a political label than it is to put yourself on a foundation of life label, which I did actually hear you talk about, Andrew, about identity and actually being proud to claim it, which was an interesting thing, which I absolutely agree with. But yeah, I think it's sort of like, for me, I did a huge study on politics earlier this year, and I was like, that's cool, but I feel like there's something more, something that can be on both sides of the realm. It doesn't have to be right or left leaning. And then I was, discovered humanism, which is that foundation. So, but I don't think a lot of kids get to that stage. It's about that knowledge that they can get into it and build out their activism or, yearning for life from that point of view.
I mean, it's true what you say, and if I reflect on that by thinking about what happened to lots of our humanist student groups, we had, humanist student groups have declined something in the last few years. We don't worry about that too much because it's a natural sort of student groups come and go. But definitely one of the things we noticed in the sort of current wave of student groups not being able to attract new volunteers and so on, was definitely because students' attention had gone elsewhere. I mean, we had Brexit, that was very big on campuses 10 years ago, and that took a lot of student focus. Then we had the climate, and now we have Gaza. So, and these three things in particular over the last 10 years have become such all-consuming issues. I think that's the other risk as well. People, the ideal person will have a sort of mixed economy of lots of different things in their life, right? They'll be a member of this, a member of that, and they'll have this view and that view. And increasingly people are either focusing on one thing or having sort of, tribalizing in a way that sort of, well, I think this one thing, and therefore now I think all these other things as well. I'm not open to anything else. I've just joined this one thing. I've always been people who are like that, who join sort of like political groups that are very all-consuming or whatever. But I do think it's become more and more of a phenomenon now. And I think it's also backed up by a wider, online siloing too, which we've already spoken about. And I think that is definitely a challenge because, people who are members of humanist organizations, apart from people like all of us who are very keen to give a lot of time to it, they're more likely to be interested in lots of other things as well. And so, you need a ready population of people who are widely interested and thoughtful in order to get future members of humanist organizations. And if, as you're saying, there are actually people who are instead focusing in and are not widely interested, but are more, saying, well, this is my thing and I'm going to really pursue that. I think that is a problem for civilization as well, not just a problem for human organizations.
Yeah. And I'll say this, I was just going to say, Mary, the fact that we do the statements that you work on, and like we did the one on the treaty talk, and we're doing the one on climate change coming up. I think that gives a lot of our younger generation that want to get onto that side of things an ability to investigate it and actually find a pathway of their sort of what they're interested in with that foundation of humanism with it as well. So.
Yeah, so Jason's referring to our position statements, which set out our views on current issues. So we've published position statements on secularism and First Nations peoples, and we're working on a climate action one at the moment, and one on voluntary assisted dying and one on biodiversity coming up. And there's a number of others that will, gender equality as well, we're planning. So I think that the big thing about humanism that gives us an advantage over those single issue organizations is that we provide people with an outlet for any particular issue that they might be interested in that's aligned with our values. And in addition to allowing them to work on the issues that they're interested in, we also provide them with a way of viewing life that gives them a meaningful and fulfilling life and a moral compass and people to go on that journey with and form community with. So I think that whole ecosystem of things that we provide is really well-rounded compared to the single issue.
Of course, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's good for retention, but people have got to find us in the first place.
Do you do anything like that over in the UK, Andrew? Like make position statements or like sort of that direction?
Yeah. I mean, we've got a policy unit and a advocacy team that work on that. I mean, our problem is too much policy, really, too many positions. Over the since 1896, I think we've got there is something like 658 or 685. I can never remember which way around it is. Policy issues that we want to see changed in the UK law and policy, and we run specific proactive campaigns on about 4 of them at any one time, obviously, because it's not possible to make change without focus. But yeah, we do. I mean, we don't make position statements about every day, something new. And it sounds like you're
make the best take.
Yeah, exactly. They need to be well considered. They need to be well rooted. Exactly. Although there is an answer to that. They need to be, of course, an objective answer. They need to be well rooted in humanist values and policies. I mean, the Humanists International is a very good source, of course, of policy as well. They have a good searchable database on their own website of agreements that, especially declarations that have been agreed by the global humanist community, which are very interesting, therefore, on things like secularism and climate and democracy and everything else.
I'm just currently reading your book on secularism at the moment.
Oh, are you? It's there it is in the background. Yeah. Well, it's a bit out of date because it in the last chapter it refers to the first Trump presidency, so I've got to revise it. There's a revision coming, but the problem is every time the publisher talks about revising it, I think, well, will there ever come a moment when these things are settled? I mean, the moment that you write it is out of date. Who could have imagined the complete onslaught on freedom of religion and belief that the Trump regime is currently presiding over, or that they would ally with Russia? I mean, there's this bit in the book on secularism where I talk about how Russia and China and the Islamic states in the UN particularly have been some of the greatest enemies of actively lobbying, to restrict human rights when it comes to religion or belief, particularly. And I think, gosh, now you'd have to add the US to the list. Russia, China, the US, and the Arab and the Islamic states. It's like a alternative timeline, really. So, I mean, the that book, I think, is well, when you get to the end of it, you'll see. It's very much a product of its age. Things change very quickly these days.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, I'm conscious of the time. I know we said an hour for yourself.
Oh yes.
But do you need to go anywhere? Do you want to do another?
Yes, I've got to go to work. It's 9 o'clock in the morning for me. You're all about to have your cocktails and kick back.
We'll let you go, but it's been an absolute pleasure having you, Andrew. And thanks for coming back.
I just want to thank you so much, Andrew, for celebrating our 5th birthday with us, as well as for helping with our launch 5 years ago. It's been great to have you back to talk about those 5 years.
Well, I'm enormously impressed with everything that you've done. So happy birthday, but also, the next 5 years even more. I think Jason's right. I think the next year's a big one. I can feel your 6th birthday. This is where you really start sorting it when you're 6. You remember being 6? And it's when you really start to have strong opinions and you're going to sort things out. And I can tell that's going to be the case for you. And I'm sorry, Les, about your connection that we didn't get to talk more about your work. But thank you and congratulations.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Appreciate you.
And everyone, if you're still listening, please subscribe to the channel. It does help out a lot, okay? So catch you all later.
Use your eyes, know yourself, realize, understand and empathize. We could learn to fill the world with love.